Welcome in to the WalterPicks Fantasy Football Show. My name is Avery. I'm here with Seth. We are ready to go in Week 8. Here are all the guys you need to start and sit later and defenses at the end. So make sure to stick around for that. Like the video for us. It helps us as creators. And we will get going with Troy Franklin. Now, this is a guy in a start-sit list that you probably haven't heard in a while. His name value is not very high. But he gets this matchup versus the Dallas Cowboys, guys. And we know week after week after week, this is one that we want to be targeting. Now, you look at his stats in the WalterPicks app here. It's not necessarily amazing. It's not all green. It's not rainbows, but he is running more routes than Marvin Mims on a per game basis. Last week, he did have 10 targets. Now he gets an even better matchup this week against the Dallas Cowboys, who are top 3 in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. They are top 10, top 5 in yards allowed, success, everything. We've seen week after week, you get shootouts against the Dallas Cowboys. Troy Franklin is a start. You can even get him on the waiver wire in some leagues. Obviously, we're going to be starting Courtland Sutton as a top 10 wide receiver this week because of that. I think we also can go through and get J.K. Dobbins in there, a guy that's been a little bit disappointing over the past few weeks. Again, this matchup cannot be ignored. Bo Nix putting up 40 points last week. The offense is rolling. This is one where we are starting these fringe guys and getting as many pieces as we can. Seth, is there any reason that you have to not trust Troy Franklin this week?
No, I'm going with him this week. Especially there are so many buys this week. We have so many teams that you're missing players. You're missing some of your studs that, some of those wide receivers like the Lions and the Seahawks. I think Troy Franklin's the perfect waiver ad, especially if he's available in your league or someone you could just plug in off the waiver wire.
Yeah, and speaking of somebody you can plug in, Ricky Pearsall here. If he does end up playing, this man has been on the injury report every single week. He is a must start. He is a borderline top 15. I don't care about the matchup against the Houston Texans. It is relatively negative to fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, but this offense is passing at a good amount, regardless of we get Brock Purdy in this lineup or Mac Jones. They've both been looking decent as far as being serviceable to these wide receivers. Ricky Pearsall is running the most routes per game. He has the opportunities. Whoever really is the wide receiver one in this matchup is somebody that we're starting. We hope it's Ricky Pearsall. As the time of this recording, we don't know exactly if he's going to be in or out. Seth, do you have any kind of restrictions for somebody that's been injured, maybe could see a little bit of a lower snap share? Like, what is your rundown here for the people?
Yeah, it's a tough one because he has been injured and he's been kind of someone I was really excited about at the start of the season. And with this injury, it's definitely becoming less exciting. But I think if he's in the game, if he plays, I'm going to play him because they've been winning games without rushing people back in. They're giving Purdy a break. They're giving Pearsall a break. I would certainly love if they had a bye week coming up, but it's week 14. But yeah, I'm definitely going to start Pearsall if he's in. I think adding him into the mix will help Kittle. National Tight Ends Week next week, by the way. So make sure you start your tight ends, especially like George Kittle. I think they got to get him a tight end touchdown for sure. But Ricky Pearsall, I think, would be a great start as well. With the run game, the way it's working, teams are going to have to focus on that even more. That's going to further open up players like Pearsall to have a great week.
Yeah. And Seth, while you pull up Wan'Dale Robinson, I will say I am trading for George Kittle at every chance I get. He had a terrible game. I don't think he caught one ball last week.
Yeah, it was a goose egg.
Yeah, everybody's upset about that, but we know it's George Kittle. He's going to catch the ball. They really need him in this offense, like to block and also to be a receiver and a red zone threat. He was the overall tight end one last year, but we also can go through and start Wan'Dale Robinson if we do need it. He is a guy that's kind of come on the scene since Jackson Dart has started. I mean, 5 targets, 7 targets, 7 targets, 12 targets. He has over a 90% route participation rate, running some of the most routes. Now, yes, Darius Slayton has not been in this game for a few weeks. Even if Darius Slayton does come back into this matchup, Wan'Dale Robinson is that slot wide receiver, that low average depth of target guy that's going to get more targets than not. They don't run him on deep routes, so it's going to be more of a concise target share, which is exactly why he's leading in targets. 6 receptions for 95 yards last week. I absolutely love that for him. Again, coming into a matchup against the Eagles, which have been relatively positive in allowing fantasy points to wide receivers this year. We know they've been airing the ball out as far as Eagles terms over the past few weeks as well. If they continue to do that in a divisional matchup against a quarterback that's been playing pretty good in Jackson Dart, we could see a little bit more pass volume again for this Giants team. He's put up 15 and 20 points in his last 2 weeks. I like Wan'Dale Robinson as a target guy. We can go through and start in a flex spot. Seth, I have him personally starting in one of my leagues. I'm sticking by this take. I don't just make him to talk. What do you think about Wan'Dale Robinson?
Well, I'm going to throw the stats right in the dead center of the screen here because he just played the Eagles 2 weeks ago and he dropped 20 points on 6 targets, 84, and a touchdown. So it's not like this is like a what would this matchup look like? We normally have to do that for nearly every game, but this is a divisional matchup that played 2 weeks ago, and the Giants honestly looked pretty good against Denver last week as well. Obviously, they fell apart at the end. You could blame the coaching. I certainly do. I wish they would have run some more clock. They fought for a touchdown they didn't need at the end of the game because they just could have run the clock down and had a couple more shots at it. But despite that, they play the Eagles. They just played 2 weeks ago. I don't think the Eagles have gotten a lot better in that 2 weeks, and the Giants certainly don't look like they've gotten any worse. That was not luck. They did great against the Denver defense, one of the toughest in the league. So I think Wendell, solid start this week.
And if we go ahead and look at DK Metcalf, looking at the stats for this man, it doesn't really look amazing. I mean, he's had about 3 or 4 targets or catches per game. It's not a flashy guy. I mean, this offense isn't necessarily amazing. They scored 30 plus last week. It looks amazing. But against the Green Bay Packers this week, it is a decent one. Seth, I will leave this up to you if we should start or sit DK Metcalf. He doesn't necessarily need a giant amount of targets to be fantasy viable because of the role he plays in this offense. Are we putting him? Are we trusting DK Metcalf in our starting lineups this week?
Yeah, I certainly am this week. And the main reason is we looked last week, we did some research, and we saw that DK Metcalf had one of the hardest possible cornerback matchups. And his matchup, I apologize for getting his name here, but for the Cincinnati Bengals, I think he had 2 picks with Rodgers trying to get Metcalf the ball. One downfield and not the best throw. The other one was an amazing play and really helped the Bengals get the win. And DK Metcalf, with a hard matchup, had a bad game. Yeah, that's kind of what we expect when these top corners play these wide receivers. So now that he's facing a little bit easier of a cornerback matchup this week, I'm locking him back into lineups week 8 without a worry.
And speaking of somebody we're locking in our lineups, guys, Rico Dowdle has been somebody that has been on an absolute tear. Now, last week is the first week we see both him and Chuba Hubbard play at an even snap share, with him being a real running back, like before he even started seeing any snaps. He did drop his snaps considerably from 60 and 80% down to 46% last week versus the New York Jets. This is understandable. We're probably going to see a 2 RB system for a while. They paid Chuba a bunch of money. So as long as we want Rico Dowdle to be this RB1 for the rest of the season, the NFL is a business at the end of the day. So we do have to take that into account. But you look at it, even though he only played on 50% of the snaps, he had 17 carries, 79 yards. I mean, 4.6 yards per carry. He is clearly the most efficient running back in this backfield. If you've watched the game, Chuba Hubbard doesn't look washed, but respectfully, just a little bit washed in fantasy football terms. When you have a guy like Rico Dowdle playing right next to you, now getting a matchup here against the Buffalo Bills, they really haven't been able to stop anybody on the ground, in the air. Their defense is not great. So I think this is another spot we can go through and possibly start Rico Dowdle. I don't expect Chuba Hubbard to come in here and take a bunch of work. We will say and talk about him in a minute. But Seth, are you trusting Rico Dowdle, even though his snaps are a lot lower than they were before?
Honestly, I 10, almost 11 points isn't bad. This is the worst it gets. He had not as many carries. He didn't have a touchdown. He didn't have that many receptions. And he still scored you 10.6 points. I mean, that's his floor. And like Avery said, clearly the better back facing Buffalo this week. I'm going to start him. I mean, if you're happy with 10 points, again, much better matchup. They scored 13 points, I believe, as a team. It's an extremely low-scoring game. So, I mean, it doesn't get much worse than that. And the Jets' defense is pretty good. They're a top 13 defense, top 15 defense against running backs. The Bills are bottom 5. So when you face a bottom 5 or bottom 6 defense here, I think you got to start Rico Dowdle.
And speaking of it not getting that much worse, we are going to be sitting Chuba Hubbard in this matchup. I mean, when you look at the game scripts purely from last week, Chuba Hubbard operates as the RB1. He comes in, plays a majority of the snaps in the beginning. Looks absolutely terrible. He ran 14 times for 31 yards. That is 2.2 yards per carry. Like, very, very bad. Then you get Rico Dowdle in here. He takes a couple carries and starts running away with it. So it's like he played 54% of the snaps. I honestly think this week could go more towards Rico Dowdle, especially considering the matchup. But again, 7.5 fantasy points. He's being saved by the little amount of receiving upside that he gets. If that starts to go away for Rico Dowdle, which has been split as far as a route run per game number goes, Chuba Hubbard is needing a touchdown to get you in any type of fantasy football consideration for points. I'm not trusting it. Again, even if it is a really good matchup against the Buffalo Bills, it looks like he really is losing this job more or less. Again, he's not going to go to zero because they paid him so much money. I think at most it'll be a 70-30 split. But Seth, are you trusting Chuba Hubbard technically this RB1?
Ah, man, I'm not going to trust him because, again, like we saw with Dowdle, 10 points was the floor. But like you said, for Hubbard, extremely inefficient. Do they want to win? That is the question at the end of the day. Do the Panthers want to win this game? With Andy Dalton, the quarterback, he's had some spark in the past. Now, normally after he plays a couple of games, they start to figure it out and it starts to go back down. But he's got some spark. This team should look a little bit better. They have a chance. The Bills also look beatable. I certainly expect the Bills to win this game, but the Bills is not the completely untouchable team they've been in the past. We saw the Saints have a pretty competitive game against the Bills earlier this season, so I think the Panthers certainly could, but Dowdle for me, clearly better. Chuba Hubbard with his yards per carry, that when they know he's in the game, that he's just not that big of a threat, and they're just shutting him down. So I'm going to sit down. I'm going to sit Hubbard this week, and I'm also just going to add this. I would trade for Dowdle. Look at this playoff schedule. Saints, Tampa Bay, Seattle. Pretty good schedule. And a lot of people are like, it's just going to be a 50-50 split. Even if it is, Dowdle's floor, we saw it last week, about 10 points. I'm certainly going to try to trade for him because if he starts to take over again, we saw what he did last week. We saw what he did the week before or 2 weeks before. League winning potential. And right now is the time to buy while he's cheap.
And speaking of league winning, a quarterback that has been playing way better than we expected is Drake May. Now, Kayshon Boutte this week, guys. Is he going to be a start with that? Now, it is absolutely crazy because Drake May is atop the league in deep ball percentage. He's running the ball at a good amount. He's playing at a very high level, which is allowing these other wide receivers outside of Stephon Diggs, just some of these tight ends, to be fantasy viable. We've seen Kayshon Boutte for back-to-back weeks put over 10 fantasy points, 13.5 on the Tennessee Titans last week, and then 26 on the New Orleans Saints the week before that, making him a top flex start for a lot of people. Now coming into this matchup against the Cleveland Browns, which is one of the more negative ones, possibly one of the most negative defenses as far as pure talent goes that this team has played so far at the corner position, it's going to be tough because you look at his stats here on the WalterPicks app, guys. If you want to check these player stats, use the start sit tool and everything for week 8. Make sure to download WalterPicks. Use code Avery if you want to support me. Use code NOBS if you want to support Seth. And we can look at Kayshon Boutte here. I mean, he really hasn't averaged too many receptions per game. I mean, the last week it was 2, then it was 5, 3, 1, 2, 1. Like, it's not a very safe target share. Now, the good news is for Kayshon Boutte, I do think he is still a waiver ad, is he is consistently running the most routes per game on this team, right up there with Stephon Diggs. So it is a positive. But again, with this matchup, it is necessarily worrisome for me where I don't want to go through and trust him. Seth, are you trusting a guy that, again, is running a lot of routes in this matchup tied to a good quarterback?
Yeah, I think that you called it out perfectly. The matchup is pretty difficult. And the last thing I want to do when I face the Cleveland Browns is hold on to the football. So I'm going to try to be getting the ball out quickly to my shorter yard targets. So maybe my guys like Hunter Henry have a decent game because he's going to be out there blocking. You need him to be blocking against the Cleveland. I think Stephon Diggs, who can work in the short yardage a little bit better, is going to have a solid game. But I don't think Kayshon Boutte is going to have that good of a game. He certainly needed the touchdown against the Titans. He needed the touchdowns again against the Saints. He did have 93 yards in that game, so impressive there. 5 for 5 from Drake May. Drake May is playing out of his mind right now. But yeah, I'm going to sit Boutte this week. The other thing I want to mention is every week, like I said, and this matters. This showed up huge last week, the wide receiver cornerback matchup. Last week, Kayshon Boutte had one of the easier matchups. So did Stephon Diggs against the Tennessee Titans, allowing fantasy points. This week, it's going to be more difficult. So when they have an easy matchup, yeah, they did great. When they have a hard matchup, it's probably going to look a little bit closer to this Miami game or this Buffalo game than it is the Saints or the Titans.
And speaking of matchups, we should also consider sitting Ramondre Stevenson. Now, it sounds crazy because he just saw his highest snap share of the year at 75%, his highest usage share at 18 carries, his highest yardage at 88 yards, one of his best yards per carry marks at 4.89 and a touchdown. Like, this was a Ramondre game, putting up 16.8 fantasy points. We knew this was going to happen. It was the Tennessee Titans. They're the number 2, I believe, right behind the Ravens in fantasy points allowed to running backs every single week. This is a team that is going to allow points to running backs. Now you get the complete opposite of that matchup in the Cleveland Browns, who are even tougher against running backs than they are against wide receivers. This could get ugly. Ramondre Stevenson, more than not likely, is going to not fall in the end zone. He's going to need some receptions. And over the past few weeks, even before this one, 13 carries, 7 carries, 9 carries, it's not a safe spot for Ramondre Stevenson against this Cleveland defense. The defensive line with Myles Garrett is legit. It's crazy, but I'm sitting Ramondre Stevenson. Even if I do believe in Drake May somewhat, it's just not a good matchup where we want to be taking these chances. Seth, do you agree, or do you think we should still put him in our starting lineup?
Yeah, I agree 100%. If you go through the WalterPicks app and you compare all these players, you compare all their snap shares, you see Ramondre, let's just look at his throughout the week. You'll see his snaps, his snap percentage. In games where it's a little bit more competitive against the Steelers, they were losing a lot of that game, and he fumbled quite a bit in that game. I know Antonio Gibson was there. Carolina, Buffalo a couple weeks ago. It's never been that strong in the closer games, in the games that are really competitive. That Buffalo game, really competitive, really close. Only 51% snap share. I know Antonio Gibson played some of that game as well. But then we have some easy matchups where he's running fine. I mean, even against the Saints, though, only 1.8 fantasy points. It's just not looking great for Ramondre. Even in that game, 13 rush attempts, 41% rush share. It's just not enough. It's not enough. And when he's facing the Cleveland Browns, that's not going to work. So I'm going to leave him on the bench this week.
Yeah, speaking of another tough matchup here, Bill Krosky-Merritt. Krosky-Merritt here, man, this one really does hurt my soul. Because if you guys don't know, I am a Commanders fan. We don't have Jaden Daniels, probably going to be out for this week's matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs. I would have loved to see it. I would have loved to see it even if we lost. But it's a tough matchup. Like, this defense does not allow a lot of points to running backs. They're in the bottom half of the league in that. And you look at last week against one of the best matchups in the Dallas Cowboys, only 4.2 fantasy points, 13 carries, 33 yards on that 2.5 yards per carry. I mean, when you don't have Jaden Daniels, when Terry McLaurin might not be playing, when Debo might not be playing, this offense is kind of in shambles right now. And it's not one that I want to buy in on. Jacory Krosky-Merritt really has not been a safe start for us this week. So against a pretty tough matchup, unfortunately, I'm going to have to sit my boy. Seth, is this an okay move to make, or is this just all my emotions?
I think this is a good move to make. Unfortunately, with Mariota in especially, he looks like someone that really wants to run the ball in the red zone. That's what we've seen in the past when Jaden Daniels missed some games. Is Mariota really taking over in the red zone, or Zach Ertz, and it's just not being the running backs. So I'm going to bench him. I do want to kind of point out, hey, Giants, Eagles, Dallas Cowboys again in the championship. If they do have time to figure it out by then, there's a world where he's a league winner. Jay Daniels comes back from the injury. Terry McLaurin is back. Debo's back. This offense starts to cook, and he kind of takes over as the RB1 by the end of the year. They've got the bye week 12. Rookies tend to get a little bit of a boost. So I would see, like, if somebody in your league will send you Bill for free or for like a bench swap, I would probably do that because, it's a high upside stash for playoffs. But you definitely have to sit him and be willing to hold on to him until he breaks out, or maybe if he doesn't.
And Kamani Vidal is another running back, speaking of these kind of lower level guys, that I'm not going to be starting this week. I know last week didn't look great. He was the RB27. It was against a tough defense in the Indianapolis Colts. Only 7.5 fantasy points here, 9 carries for 20 yards, 2 yards per carry. It did not look great. Now, the week before that, it was against the Miami Dolphins, who he had 18 carries for 124 yards, 6 yards per carry. Like, it looked great. Now, these are two complete different opposite sides of the spectrum. The Miami defense is one of the best. The Colts defense is great in stopping running backs. So now you get a matchup this week against the Minnesota Vikings, which are very, very good in stopping points allowed to the running backs. But just in general, they don't allow a lot of fantasy points. They are very solid as far as talent and an internal unit goes. So when you look at Vidal, 64% of the snaps, 67% of the snaps week before that. He's not a workhorse running back. Hassan Haskins is still going to get some touches. And in a very tough matchup, if he doesn't get 5 receptions, he's not going to score a ton of fantasy points. So this is not one where you can kind of take the middle ground of the two against the Colts and Miami and say, this is probably what we're going to expect. Maybe 10 carries. Maybe he'll be efficient. Maybe he won't. 2 receptions. Like, it's not a great spot start for Vidal, especially against a really tough matchup. I would be starting him in week 9, though, against the Tennessee Titans. Again, we just talked about how positive that matchup is. So don't drop him. Hang on to him. But for this week, he's probably a sit.
Yeah, I'm going to agree that he's probably a sit this week. I do think that, hey, if you got players out on bye, there are so many players on bye. He's not he at least has some upside with the receiving game. This Colts game got out of hand so fast. They didn't really have a lot of opportunity. I mean, first drive of the game, I think Jonathan Taylor scored a touchdown. Then they drove down. Jalen Warren scores a touchdown. I think Michael Pittman Jr. had a touchdown. Jonathan Taylor had another touchdown, then another touchdown. Like, it was pretty much out of hand so quickly, and they're just dropping back and need to throw it like 13, 14, 30 yards down the field. Plus, the offensive line is cooked. They are on their sixth, I think, right guard option or sixth option on that offensive line. So many players are injured. That's certainly not helping the run game either. So I do think he can bounce back a little bit, like you said, Avery. Maybe something between Miami, a little bit closer to the Colts' performance, though. But if I've got a lot of players out on bye, I'll give it a shot and not be like, and I'll have some hope that it will go well. But if you're debating between him and some players that are averaging like 11, 12 points per game, I think I just stick with them this week because that's probably more closer to the ceiling of what he could perform in week 8.
And when we look at a guy, we should probably just consider sitting, not even put in our starting lineup. It's going to be Jerry Jeudy. You look at the target share, it's actually been pretty decent. I mean, outside of last week, 13 targets, 5, 9, 5, 8, 8. It's not bad. The problem is Dylan Gabriel is bad. Like, the target share is not catchable. It's not great. Jerry Jeudy's definitely not helping his case as far as that goes. But if you just take out the target share, wide receiver 73, 35, 79, 48, 94, 53. Like, this is not even a guy sniffing close to our starting lineup right now. Now getting one against the New England Patriots. This is a decent matchup, but he's going to get put on Christian Gonzalez. And Seth was just talking about these cornerback to wide receiver matchups. They do mean more than people think. Christian Gonzalez is a very good corner. He is not going to allow a lot of fantasy points if he is going to be shadowing Jerry Jeudy for a majority of this game, which he should, because who else is there? Isaiah Bond? No. Jerry Jeudy is worrying me. Even though he only played 68% of the snaps last week versus Miami, I mean, that game was just out the window. Like, it was not even good. So if you can't get more than 3 receptions a game, which he has barely been able to do, I'm not trusting him in a matchup without a good quarterback, with a not good matchup. He's just not somebody I'm putting in my starting lineup. Seth, do you have any reason to disagree with that?
I have no reason. I'm definitely locking him in the lineup. And if I'm Dylan Gabriel, I'm not throwing at Christian Gonzalez. Like, I want to keep my job. So I'm not going to do that. So I think Jerry Jeudy stays on the bench. And maybe the tight ends get a nice upgrade this week.
Yeah, that is fair. And when we look at some defenses, guys, you can stream these defenses if they're not already picked up. The Colts are going to be one of, if not the top defense of the week, getting one against the Tennessee Titans. Guys, we see this team week after week after week. They allow the most points to opposing defenses. The Colts are a very good defense themselves. Guys, make sure to comment your start sit questions before you hop off this video so we can go ahead and answer them. And then you can go get the Bills defense getting one against the Carolina Panthers. I know some guys internally on the WalterPicks team has not really believed in the Bills defense against this Carolina Panthers matchup. I think that's completely fair. The Bills defense themselves is not very good, but the Carolina Panthers, if they're going to be starting Andy Dalton, they don't have a ton of playmakers. I think this can be a game where the Bills play decently and they're not rostered in a ton of leagues, as well as the Los Angeles Chargers. This is a defense that's barely rostered 10%, 15%, depending on what league site you use, but they get one against the Minnesota Vikings, who they have some talent. They have some very good guys, but when you're dealing with Carson Wentz, he's going to make some mistakes. There are going to be some turnovers. And a lot of times in fantasy football for defenses, you score more points off sacked and turnovers than you do just keeping a team low scoring. So even if the Vikings do put up some points, this can be a spot where the Chargers defense does keep pace and score some fantasy points. But that's going to finish out this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. We will see you in the live streams and all the rest of the videos coming soon.